Good evening, guys. Vishnu here. Hi. So, this is the continuation of the previous video that I uploaded, which is just basics for big absolute beginners. So, this is a continuation of that video. So, in the previous video, we had covered what is a chessman, movement of chess pieces, and notation also. So, I missed a few points to mention in the previous video, so I will cover that in this video before I start with the intended topic for this video. So this video is going to be about a continuation of the previous one, and to talk about checks, checkmate, and stalemate. So what I missed in the previous video was that whenever you set up a board, a physical board, while playing against an opponent, you should keep one thing in your mind. That is, when you set up the board, you should always see to it that the bottom right hand square of the bottom right hand of your right, the bottom right hand corner should be a white square or a light square, and the same case for black as well. So you can see that this is the right for black and this is the right for white, and both are light squares or a white square. So whenever you set up a board, the bottom right hand square should be a light square or a white square, and only then you should check that and only then start setting up the pieces. Else you will go wrong with your setup of the board, and it would be illegal to play that way. Okay, and another thing which I missed was about en passant or en passant. So here I'll make some random moves: e4, g5, f4, g4, h4. So like I told you before, en passant happens when it happens for black when the pawn has moved two squares to the front, and you have an opportunity to capture it by bypassing squares in front of you. That is, you can diagonally capture it and without the pawn being present on that particular square, like this, for example. So the right to perform an en passant or an en passant exists only on the immediate move after your opponent has played the move h4, as in this case. That means, say that your pawn is on g4, now your opponent has played h4. You can perform en passant only immediately after this move has been played. That is gh3. Say, for example, I make another move, knights. You make another move, say bishop to g7, and you prefer to take en passant on the next move after playing bishop to g7. Well, that's not possible because you don't hold the right to perform an en passant or an en passant after you have played any other move. That is, you can take en passant only on the same move after your opponent has made the pawn push two squares to the front. On the immediate next move, on the very next move, you are supposed to take an en passant. If that is not possible, then if taking en passant is not a good idea depending upon the position, then you can just avoid it. But you cannot postpone the effect of en passant. That is not possible in chess because that's a rule. So these are two things which I wanted to highlight because I missed it in the previous video. You just think whether anything I missed anything else or not. So I think I missed anything else. These are the pretty much very basics how to set up the board and all that. Okay, so now let me get to the intended topic for this video. I'll close this board. Let me open the database. Okay, so we're going to talk about checks, checkmate, and stalemate. So how do you identify whether it is a check, checkmate, or a stalemate? That's the first question that comes to your mind. So how do you define a check? What is a check in chess? For example, in this position, you can see that I can play a rook to a8. A check is nothing but a threat to your king made by any piece of the opponent, except the king, because the king cannot make a check to another king because they cannot occupy the except the king. All other pieces are capable of making checks to the opponent's king. In this case, a rook has been moved from the square a7 to a8, and it is threatening the king with a check. So when you meet face to face like this with any piece on the board, and there are no pieces on its way, and only when the king and the threatening piece exists, you call it a check. So now, when a check happens, there are three ways of defending the check. One is by blocking the check, like in this case, you can see that black has a bishop on d6, and he can move to f8. So he can block this check with his bishop. So this is one way of saving your king from a check. There are two other ways of doing it as well. For example, if this is the position, and say that rook has moved to a8 and it is a check to the black king. So now there's no piece that can block the way of the rook so that you can shield your king from a check. But whereas you can capture the piece, that is, you can capture this rook on a8 with your bishop. So this is legal to do so, and you can simply capture it. So this is another way of saving your king from a check. Now the third way on how to defend yourself from a check is to move away from the check if you have any adjacent squares that are free of threats from your opponent. For example, in this position, again, the rook can give a check to the king by moving to a8, and you can see there is no way of blocking or shielding your king from a check, and there is no piece that can capture the rook on a8 also. Even though there is a bishop, it is a dark squared bishop, and it cannot block the king from a check, and cannot capture also because it is runs on dark squares and it is not on e4, it is on d4. But whereas there is an escape square for the king here on h7. So what you can do is, when you are in a check like this, you can simply move your king to that square. So this is another way of saving yourself from a check. So these are the only three ways that you can save your king from a check. And if you cannot perform any of these ways, that means if you cannot escape from a check using these three ways, it means your king has been checkmated. So what are the rules? What are the conditions that hold to declare that your king has been checkmated? So in order to understand that, you just have to apply these three principles. That is, capturing a piece that is giving you a check, shielding your king from a check with a piece of your own, or move the king to any one of the adjacent squares that is free from checks created by your opponent. So these are the only three ways where you can save yourself from a check. And if you cannot perform any of these three ways, it is clear that your king has been mated. And the same for your opponent. If your opponent cannot do it, that means that you have checkmated your opponent. So it's one and the same for you as well as for your opponent. So this is about checks. So what is a checkmate? Checkmate is a situation where you have given a check to your opponent's king, and at the same time, the king does not have any escape squares to go, nor it does have any piece to capture that piece of yours that is giving a check to the king, and nor it has any piece to block the king from a check, like I've already stated the three conditions before. For example, in this position, the queen can give checkmate in two ways. So one is to simply move to h5, and it is giving a check to the king. And you can see all these red squares which I've highlighted. All these are protected, are defended by the, are protected by the white king. These three squares, g6, g7, and g8. And you cannot move to h8 and h6 because the queen is covering those two squares. So you can, like I was saying, you cannot move your king to h8 or h6 because the queen is on the same file. as that of the king. So it is clear that the black king has been mated. Another way to create a checkmate in this position is move your king from g5, g5 to g7. So here also, the h8 is all these red squares are highlighted. So it indicates that it is illegal for the king to move in these squares to these squares because these are all controlled by the white queen. And you cannot capture the white queen because it is defended by the king. So it is illegal to capture the queen because it is protected by the king. Because, of course, yeah, so that's what I was saying. So it is clear that in this case, it is a checkmate. So I will show you another example. Here, it's black to move. No matter which square black is moving, be it to f8 or be it to d8, you can checkmate the black king by moving one of these rooks to the 8th rank. Hope you know what a rank or a file means by now because I've already explained it in the previous video. All these rows are called as ranks in chess and all these columns are called as files in chess. So the files are alphabetically put in the order from A to H, whereas ranks are numbered as 1 to 8. So if the king is moved to f8, you can simply create a check by moving the rook to h8 and it would be a checkmate. Also move the other rook to a8 and it would be a checkmate. Because you can clearly see that once the rook has been moved to a8, this rook is controlling the entire 8th rank and this rook is controlling the entire 7th rank. So there is no escape square for the king and the king does not have any other pieces, neither a pawn nor bishop, knight, queen or rook, nothing. He is alone, completely alone. So all his adjacent moves has been controlled, adjacent squares has been controlled by the rooks and therefore there is no way for him to escape from this check, hence it is clearly a checkmate. Even if the king has moved to d8 instead of f8, say the king has moved from e8 to d8 to the left hand side, you can still checkmate him like this. Rook to h8 or even rook to a8. And the same thing, the same idea exists even now. That is, two rooks are controlling both these ranks and the king has nowhere to go, no place to go. It is clearly a checkmate. This is a very simple puzzle which any layman can understand. That's why I chose this puzzle to explain what is a checkmate. So next is stalemate. So you might be knowing about the word stalemate. You might have come across this word because it exists in the Oxford Dictionary and it is also used in real life situations where, and according to the Oxford Dictionary, it says that stalemate is a situation where you can't make any progress. For example, it is the same here in chess too. Of course, it has been derived from chess. So, so in this position, you can see that, yeah, it's white's turn to move. And what happens if white plays a move king to d6? So now you can say that you can see that it's black's turn to move, but black does not have any legal moves to make. He cannot capture the pawn on d7 because it is protected by the king on d6. It is illegal to do so. Nor can he move to any of his adjacent squares. You can see all these red squares. The e8 square and c8 square are protected by the pawn on d7. And the e7 square and the c7 square are controlled by the white king on d6. So the king has nowhere to go. But is the king under check? Can you spot any piece or pawn of white that is directly threatening the black king? Of course, no. It's not visible because there is no such threat right now. So the king is not under check, but at the same time, the king is unable to move to any of his adjacent square, nor he can capture this pawn, so he cannot make any progress from this situation. He does not have any legal moves to make, and it is his turn. So what should he do? You can't do anything. The game will be declared as a draw, and it will be declared as half point each, and that's it. That's the end of the game. So this is called as such a situation is called as stalemate. It so happens in blitz or bullet, people players forget that if you make a particular move, it could be. It so happens in blitz, and it's quite kind of common. It's often appears in blitz and bullet games where you unknowingly create a stalemate in position and end the game in a draw, in spite of being a piece up or in spite of being having a superior material. It happens even at the top level. It happens. So this is what stalemate is about. I'll show you another 3 more examples. So let's see what all those examples are. So in this position, of course, it's white's turn to move, and you can. I believe you can spot a mate now. If you move your king to g7, it would be a checkmate. But what happens if you move your queen to g6? Say that you're playing this bullet game online and you reach such a position, and the mouse slips happen, and you move your king to you move your queen to g6 instead of g7. What would happen? See, you can clearly see that it's black's turn now after you have played your move queen to g6, but the king cannot go anywhere. It cannot go to g8, it cannot go to g7, it cannot go to h7, because all these are controlled by the queen, and the g7 square is also controlled by the king. Goes by the queen as well. So the king does not have any legal moves to make, but it is his turn to move. So what should he do? Nothing can be done. It will be declared as a draw, and half point each will be shared. So this game will end up in a draw. It's called as a stalemate position. So be careful while playing bullet and blitz online. Just see that just avoid human errors like this, and just be careful of the stalemating tricks that your opponent creates. So I would like to say one other thing about stalemate also. So it will give you more clarity on what position is actually a stalemate. Now in this position, you can see that black has a pawn on a4, white also has a pawn on a2, and another pawn on g7. White's king is on g6, black's king is on g8, all evident from the position. It's black's turn to move. So is this position a stalemate? The king is not under check, but at the same time the king cannot move anywhere. And like I've told you, it is black's turn to move. Black's king does not have any legal moves to make, but black can move this pawn on a4. He has one legal move to make. He can push it to a3. But can you call this position a stalemate just because your king cannot move and only you can move this pawn? Definitely no. You cannot call this position a stalemate because you have one legal move to make. So whenever you have a legal move to make, even though the king cannot move, but if you have any extra pieces or pawns which are able to move, then even if white reaches such a position, you cannot call it a stalemate because you have a legal move to make. Only when you are completely out of moves, you call it a stalemate. So here you can play a3. The king would move to f6 or h6. Black can come to h7, his only move. The king will go to f7, and white can win this position by promoting his pawn to a queen on g8. It's clearly a win for white. So this is one other position and one other information that I wanted to add because it would be incomplete talking about stalemate. So let's go to the final position. Here, it's black's turn to move. You can see this black color highlighted over here at the end. And you can see a difference from the previous position. The black's pawn is already on a3 and it cannot move forward because of the pawn on a2. And the king also cannot move anywhere. White has just played king to g6. So is this position a stalemate? Definitely yes, because the king does not have any legal moves to make, nor his extra pawn can make any legal moves because it is blocked by the pawn on a2. So none of his pawns, and he has no pieces, and he has no other piece which can make a legal move. So it is clearly he is out of moves, and this position is clearly stalemate and be declared as a draw. So that's it, guys, about this checkmate, and stalemate. These are the main differences between what is a check, what is a stalemate, what is a checkmate. And I hope you're clear with what I missed out in the previous video about en person. That is, if you want me to repeat it, I can repeat it again. En person, the right to perform the en person exists only on the very next move after your opponent has played, or after your opponent has pushed your pawn two moves forward. You cannot postpone en person. You cannot make any other move and think of taking it on the after one or two moves later. You have to perform on the very next move. So that is about en person. And please be careful while setting up the board. See to it that when you set up all the pieces on the board, the right square, the bottom right square should be a light square or a white square, be it you're playing white or black. This is mandatory for you to set up the pieces in the right way before you start the game. So please make sure that the right hand square of yours, the right hand bottom square of yours, is a light square or a white square. I hope you got something insightful. Of course, it is only the very foundation and the basics, but in case you don't know, and if you are able to gain something out of it, I would be really happy. And thanks for watching the video. It's Vishnu Menon from Kerala, signing off from Kailash. Thank you. Take care of yourself. Bye.